Thank you all so much for joining us today. Now, the legalization of marijuana for both medical and recreational use has been contested on the ballots, and it has been all over the news. Although it's only been talked about for those 21 years of age and older, yet it's very prevalent to teenagers. And because of that, how fitting that here we are in the art department of a high school. Now, with us today, we have Dr. Bellace and Mr. Jones. Mr. Bellace, would you like to start with an opening statement?
Sure. There are 3 reasons why I think teenagers really should consider marijuana use as more destructive than for adults. First reason being memory. Your brain has a certain area called the hippocampus, which shrinks if you smoke 5 joints or more a week for a period of about 6 weeks or more. And when the hippocampus shrinks, your memory gets a little bit worse. I don't know about you, but the number one thing that I needed to get through school, memory. One time I was in a school and a student said to me, "Weed is like salad," which made me laugh because I'm like, you don't eat it with vinaigrette, man. It's definitely not salad. And the second reason why weed is not salad, particularly for a teenager, has to do with IQ. There's a study that came out in August of 2012 that showed if you smoke from the time you're 15 until your adult years, you can lose up to 8 IQ points. That is a powerful thing. So when you make jokes like weed is harmless or weed is like salad, you have to realize that ultimately it can affect your intelligence abilities. And the third piece and final piece is really about mental illness. Studies that looked at long-term marijuana use, again, it started in the teenage years, showed that you're at a greater likelihood for developing symptoms of psychosis at some point in your life. It doesn't mean that the weed is causing psychosis. It just means that if there's a budding mental illness, some people turn to marijuana to try to treat it, but it turns out not to be a very good medication for that. It can ultimately exacerbate your symptoms. So for those 3 reasons, memory, IQ, and mental illness, I believe that particularly for teenagers, marijuana is not a safe drug, and it's not smart to make it legal for them to use.
Thank you, Dr. Bellace. Would you have any opening comments, Mr. Jones?
Yes, thank you. First of all, I want everyone to be aware that it seems to me that a lot of the information and the questions that you're going to hear in this debate have come from a website called drugabuse.gov, which is a government-run website. And if you're looking to get your drug information from a government website is like trying to get sex information, getting your sex information from a Catholic church. It's just not. There's so much first-person research out there. My personal use, 15 years smoking cannabis, not a heavy user, just moderately. Some of the health benefits I've had have been relief of nausea, headaches, sleep deprivation, even, what was that? Oh, I've had some of the best sex of my life on marijuana. And women have walked away very, very happy. And I think further research needs to be done in that department for the sake of the women. Now, the hemp industry, this is a whole separate issue. I don't want to get into it, but the hemp industry was a thriving industrial crop. It was big profits in this country. We no longer grow it. The first marijuana law in the U.S. was a law passed that every farmer had to grow hemp on their farm because it was that big of a cash crop. Now we import all our hemp. It's the strongest natural fiber that grows. It also can be used as a biofuel and oils and such. Personally, I feel like a lot of this is a human rights issue. If I'm not allowed to experiment with a chemical, experiment with my consciousness in the privacy of my own home, that I feel that that's a grotesque infringement on my basic human right. And we could talk about the war on drugs. I'll just say, the war on drugs has been a colossal failure. I think everybody can agree on that. More money and time has been wasted on the war on drugs. When we have 50+ million marijuana smokers in the country, and it's getting bigger every year. I just want to say it's ludicrous. You might as well make masturbation illegal.
Well, on that note, our first question is for Dr. Bellace. Now, why is marijuana illegal when alcohol is not? Why can't people have their choice?
If you look at the history of making marijuana illegal, actually there are some racial elements to this. You can go back to opiates being made illegal, started because of the Chinese immigrants that came into California. You can look at alcohol becoming something that was illegal during Prohibition. It was believed it was because a lot of European immigrants came in who drank differently than the Puritans that lived here. Marijuana is the same thing, is connected to Mexican immigrants, cocaine to African Americans. All these things became illegal partly for the racial reasons, but that you're talking about 100 years ago or more. And we're living in a different time now. We're living in a time where there's a lot more medical research. And to me, if you're introducing alcohol, the negative effects of alcohol would basically make it something you should never make legal. But the history has made it legal. And if you read about Prohibition, you understand why. But marijuana is something that has been illegal for all these years. And I think at the very least, if you're going to consider it as something that people could use, you want to limit that to people whose brains are fully developed. And the brain doesn't fully develop until about the age of 25. So at the very least, you should wait until people in their 20s before they should be allowed to use it legally, because the government, by making something legal, is giving the implicit sort of knowledge to the implicit acknowledgement that this is safe. That's what a lot of young people think. Oh, it's legal, so it must be safe, and that's just not the case, particularly for teenagers.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any rebuttal for that?
Yeah, you are absolutely right about the legalization of it. It was because it was a racial thing in the 40s because blacks and Mexicans were using this, and it's a way for a culture to control a subculture. I'm glad that you said that. I thought you were going to say something totally different. There's a lot of propaganda about why it's illegal.
Well, actually, Mr. Jones, I mean, the National Institute on Drug Abuse has done research, and it shows that marijuana use does have long-term side effects. So if it is bad for you, why should it be legal?
Well, again, I mean, the studies that you find out there, it's very limited. We're not allowed to study. Science isn't allowed to attack this substance like it is other substances because it's a Schedule 1. A Schedule 1 illegal drug means that it's harmful for you. It has no medical benefits whatsoever. So the scientific community, although with an abundance of evidence pouring in, I mean, we've all heard it, everyone's curing this with it, using it for this. I actually had it work for constipation, which I've never heard about before, but I couldn't believe it. It actually works for me. It worked for that. Scientists aren't getting funded to do further studies for this. And then consequently, when they do pilot studies and whatnot, they're not going to get further funding, and they never get, there's a barrier to publication as well. So the information information is not coming to you. Not enough scientific research is coming to you. And the stuff that you do read, if you look at it, with a microscope, you can find certain things weren't done properly. There was a study that they said, marijuana will kill. They did an LD50 study on monkeys. How long would it take for half of these monkeys to die smoking marijuana? They put gas masks on them and just bombarded them with cannabis smoke without giving them any additional oxygen otherwise. It was just the smoke. So they basically suffocated these monkeys. And then they come up with the story. They said, well, 60% of the monkeys died after 5 hours of, and those are the studies that you get passed down to you. More research needs to be done. But because of the way that this drug is classified, the research is just not allowed.
What do you think, Dr. Bellace?
I would agree that the research has been limited up until recent years. In the study I referenced earlier, the Duke study took 1,000 12-year-olds and gave them IQ tests before anyone touched marijuana. They followed them to the age of 38. And then they tested them again, their IQs. And in the intervening years, they asked them questions about marijuana use. They found out that for the individuals who started smoking at the age of 15 and continued to their 30s, those are the ones who lost the most IQ points. And that study is perhaps one of the most well-done studies on marijuana that's ever been. And so hopefully in the coming years there will be more research, because Jonesy's right. I mean, they really haven't looked at this scientifically as they should. So there's been lots of anecdotal evidence, like what Jonesy tells you, the benefits he's had, but you really need to look at a substance from a broader context if you're going to suggest it for public consumption. It all comes down to brain development. So again, if the age of the brain fully developing is 25, and you take a look at an 18-year-old, they're 7 years before that point. Their brains are not fully done developing. So wouldn't it be great if you could hold off until they're in their 20s? Probably one of the most powerful statistics I've ever seen on addiction show that if you started smoking marijuana or drinking alcohol before the age of 15, you had a nearly 50% chance of becoming addicted to it. And yes, you can become addicted to cannabis. you can become addicted to alcohol and other drugs, but particularly when you start at that early age, you have such a high chance of doing it. But if you wait till 21, the chances that you become addicted go down to 10%. So you're saving lives by delaying the onset of use, and it all comes down to brain development.
What do you think?
I have no problem with setting an age like 21. I have no problem with that at all. I just feel like, as a basic human right, we should be allowed at some point in our lives, if we choose to experiment with a psychoactive substance in the privacy of our own home, that we should be allowed to. And decriminalizing this at the least should be done. You know that half of the prisoners are in there for marijuana-related crimes. And 88% of those are in there for possession only. So now you're looking at nearly half of our prisons are filled with people who have done nonviolent crimes. And this is a huge issue. I don't know much about the brain development. I started when I was 18. I went to college. I think I did all right. I don't know anything about that.
Well, I mean, Dr. Bellace, if you don't mind me asking, have you ever smoked marijuana?
No, I've never smoked weed, but I've been around people who've smoked weed. I have friends who smoke weed, so I can appreciate at least the impact it has. And I know how serious some of those people are about marijuana, because it becomes in many ways sort of like a friend. And for some of them, a coping mechanism for the stresses of life. They see it that way. And I wrote a book called A Better High, which is all about activities you can do that help you achieve natural highs, things like exercise and laughing and so forth. Because I say there's healthier ways to deal with the stresses of life besides turning to a drug. And I know marijuana is a plant, but so is cocaine, and heroin comes from a plant. Heck, ecstasy comes from oils that come off a tree. All these things come from plants, but they're being used as a drug to ultimately, for some people, to treat things. And I say there's just a better way. You don't need to turn to a substance.
I think it's important that you realize that some of these drugs that he's mentioned, they've been synthesized. Now, that's a whole hell of a lot different than just using a plant. The coca plant is a plant that's been eaten in South America. It's been used as a food. In fact, if you go there and you call it a drug, they're offended. It's like, no droga, es un comida. It's a food to these people. What we do, what people that want to make money off stuff like this does, they then extract the chemical out of it, synthesize it. You're getting an entirely different substance. I get the youngster thing. I totally get that. I'm on board with that. I think that's great. And I'm not going to say that you shouldn't go. I think other highs are great as well. Awesome, I think that's fantastic. When I drain at 3, when the clock's ticking away, what a good feeling that is. Natural high, right? Sometimes it's just a video game, but whatever. You mentioned SAT scores, and now that study probably is legit. They probably took these kids' SAT scores. But now the question is, what do we value as intelligence in our culture?
Well, I mean, if marijuana isn't supposed to be as addictive, like alcohol, then why do you think that 56% of the people that are being treated for substance abuse are there because of marijuana use?
Well, there's one good reason for that, and that is when you're caught with marijuana, a lot of times just for possession, they give you a choice sometimes if you're a first offender. You want to either go to jail or you want to go to rehab. Now, if you have over half of the arrests being made in your town for marijuana, how many of those people are now going to be put into rehab for marijuana as a choice? Do I go to jail or do I go to rehab? Of course you're going to go to rehab. Now we get these statistics that come to the forefront. Well, 60% of all people in rehab are there for marijuana. Now that's a problem. But no, look at the fine print. They're going there as a choice that's alternate to prison. If you look at the stats of people who voluntarily submit themselves to a rehab for cannabis, it is embarrassingly small. People very rarely do that.
Well, what do you think about the statistic?
Well, there was a neat study done a couple of years ago where they took heavy users of marijuana, adults, and they put them on a locked hospital floor. And they gave half the group a sugar pill with nothing in it, the other half the group a pill with THC. And they monitored their reaction as half the group basically withdrew from smoking regular marijuana and the other half still got THC. And wouldn't you know it, the folks who were denied their THC started to go through very traditional withdrawal symptoms. So they had stress, they had anxiety, spikes in heart rate, blood pressure, and so forth. So there's no question that marijuana has a certain amount of physical addictiveness, especially the fact that the potency of marijuana has doubled over the last 25 years. It's not the worst drug on earth, let's be honest. But for the people who use it every day and feel like it's stunting their growth or affecting their potential, they feel like they're trapped. And yes, when they get caught, many times they do end up being influenced to go to rehab, but I see that as a positive thing if they want to get marijuana out of their life.
Has anything come to light to either of you in this interview or debate that you want to share?
Well, listening to Jonesy talk about the positives, I can appreciate why any person who has a relief of insomnia or constipation or has better sex, if you will, I can appreciate why you would look at that thing, whatever that is, as a positive. But I just try to encourage, Jonesy and anyone else who is a pro-pop person to look at this from a public health perspective. And whenever a government is going to say something is legal, it gives that implicit message that it's also safe. And even though Jonesy can be an adult who uses it as an apartment every once in a while and doesn't see it as negative, there are young people or people in general out there who may use it and get into a car, who may use it and be neglectful of their job and get fired, may do all sorts of things that aren't safe. And we need to consider all those angles.
That's very interesting. I mean, did you anything come to you?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Matt says, and I agree that you should, there are other ways to get highs, and I like the age suggestion as well, only because I feel as though we're a real infantile culture. But that's the only reason I feel that way. In my firsthand experience, it's been extremely safe. My friends never drive erratically on it. I've never driven erratically on it. Maybe a little slower, but that might be a good thing. Yeah. As far as brain power, I'm able to hold conversations for hours. Brilliant conversations, I've been told, on cannabis. My friends like to, they like to get high and play chess, and they play amazing, brilliant chess. I mean, these are some of the things that in my first-person experience, I've seen with this drug. I hear stories about addiction. I never met anybody who's been addicted to this, and I've never met anybody, within my own social circle, I've never come across anybody who was addicted to it. And I've never met anybody on the street that's been addicted to it. I've seen tons of, change, and you look and it's a brown bag, oh yeah. And then I've seen the junkies in Union Square. I mean, you can point those people out. Very rarely do you see somebody out there, can I get some money for weed? I'm gonna get my weed. You just never see that. It's ludicrous to think that it would have that sort of addiction. It doesn't. And compared to alcohol and heroin, the withdrawal symptoms we know what the withdrawal symptoms are. You can actually die from withdrawal symptoms of alcohol, yet it's legal. Sorry.
Was there any last kind of remarks you guys would want to say?
Well, weed is definitely not salad. And particularly for young people, I encourage natural highs and making healthier choices.
Do you have any?
I would just like to say, from a human rights perspective, I think that you should fight for your right to expand your consciousness. You should be free to do so. And I think for if life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness doesn't mean that, then I don't think the Bill of Rights is worth the hemp that it's written on.
Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. We really appreciated it.